Welcome to this acrylic paint tutorial. I have two versions here of what we're going to be doing in this tutorial. You can see the first version, the second version, they're exactly the same virtually. The reason why I chose to do this one is because it involves a lot of techniques that we've learned and that you can also continue to practice. One of the techniques would be the gradient type of painting on the background. The other one is using a palette knife. I'm not sure, I know you have some paints, but using a palette knife is an interesting thing to do, and then we'll finish it off with some painting and painting of the boat bottoms and so forth after that. So it involves a lot of different techniques. We don't have the gold that we have in this one, but we will just be using the colors, and you can kind of choose what colors you want to use. You can see here that this one is very bluish and this one is more purplish. Again, you can choose whatever you would like. Main thing to remember is we want the sails to be white. These are tall ships, so they have the long linear type of vertical type of feeling to them. We want to maintain that, and we want the water to be somewhat choppy, so we're going to create some different blues and different hues for the water. So how are you going to start this? Put these aside. Find a little canvas. You should have had a little one in your art kit, and just draw a dividing line about 1/3 down. So you can see if I was to break this into thirds, I just have a dividing line over here. That's going to be my horizon line. It's important that I know that, because as things move to the horizon, they get lighter and they get more grayed down. So it's important that I know where the horizon line is so I can make a clear definition between the water and the sky. And again, remember that the horizon line is where the water meets the sky or the earth meets the sky. So you can see that I've got my palette here. I've just got a blue, a little bit of red, maybe to purple it up a little bit, some white and some black. And what I'm going to be doing is I'm creating three hues, one hue, one color, and three tints and shades of that same color. So three different values in the same color. Okay, so you can see the palette here. This is my starting blue. I added some white to it. Then I added a little bit of black to it. I felt like that was getting a little too gray, because black very much gets gray or grays down a color. So I put a wee bit of red into it to purple it up a little bit to make it a little bit more bluish grayish. So these are my colors, and I left some black in there. And then I took a little bit of black actually and mix it in here, because I want to gray it down when we go to the horizon line. So I want a bit more of a gray blue, but very light, and that's what I'm going to use for the horizon line. So to get started, I'm going to move it in so you can see it. Moving it to about there. Let me just check that that looks good. Oh, it's not quite there yet. Okay, so you're not going to have an easel like this, and I just picked this easel up from school because I wanted to show it to you, and that's a better way to set it up and to show you what I do. You can just put your palette, or sorry, your canvas on an old board or something like that, or just even on a table. Put some newspaper underneath it to protect it so you're not getting stuff on the table. And here we start. So I'm going to start at the top. I'm going to dip in a little bit of my nice dark colors, and I'm going to start across the top. And I really don't mind if the colors are also mixing a little bit on the canvas. And you can see what's happening here, right? The colors are mixing a wee bit on the canvas. Darken it up on the top. We want the darkest on the top, dipping a little bit in the black. And I like doing it this way. Some of you might not be comfortable with this. You want your colors to be completely defined before you start, and that's okay as well. So we're blending as we go down. Second part, I'm going to add a little bit of light blue to it. See, you notice I'm going to leave a little bit of white in between because I'm going to blend that up. So now I'm blending up the blue into the darker parts. Blend, blend, blend. And I'm going to do the same with the bottom. So I'm going to clean my brush in the meantime. And I'm going to do the same with this light stuff down here. So really light, going back up. A little bit of the blue in here. And coming into it like that. And now I'm just going to go back and forth a little bit and try to really blend it through. And then I'll look back, step back and take a look and say, do I really like the way it's turned out? So a couple of things I do like. I do like that this is very gray down. It makes it look like it's going to the horizon. I'm not loving this darkness up here. It makes it look like it's a super cloudy, dark sky. So I'm going to get rid of that by adding some more blue. Not just not loving the grayish look up there. So adding a little bit more blue in there. I mean, you know, you could even say you want to make it a more blue with sky with some clouds in it. This looks quite gray. Maybe gray wasn't the best choice. So I might just go back up and really make it blue like this. And then the other thing that I might do is I might take some pretty white, put my brush on the edge, and let's get some different cloud-like formations in here. I don't know if this is going to work or not. Sometimes it's a little bit of see how things work out. Clouds always have a very definite bottom to them, but in this case I just want something that looks like it might be a little bit of a cloud formation in it, a little bit of lighter areas where the clouds might be, and those long, you know, those long clouds that kind of come in. I'm not sure. We'll see where this ends up. Okay, you can see here that I've got most of it settled the way I want it to. And I'm starting to add some clouds. So the way I do that is I'm using actually a piece of tissue paper, toilet paper, or Kleenex, whatever you like. Scrunch it up so the whole, so the surface is not flat. So there's a little bit of up and down. So let me take a fresh piece and kind of show you what I mean. So literally just kind of scrunching it up and making sure that there's creases and that this is not smooth. And then I'm going to put it into a bit of a long format like that, right? Going to dip it directly into my white paint. So directly here into the white paint and just kind of back and forth a little bit. And then I'm going to dab it right onto the canvas. Just dab, dab, dab. And then changing the direction as I dab. So changing direction a little bit. Trying to make the formation of a cloud that goes up and down a little bit in here. I'm going to do some work on this. And then here I have this one as well. So when I'm done with that, oh, that looks kind of cool. Bring it up a little bit, make this a big, maybe I'll make this. And now you can see I'm starting to pick up some of the blue, right? So as I'm going through, it's defining less of the white and a little bit more of the blue. I'm not really loving the way that one looks. So bring that one up and down. There we go. A couple of different things going on. Every once in a while, a piece of the Kleenex might come off. It's okay, you can just pull it out. If you have a sponge works just as well, especially a sea sponge, but a lot of you don't have that, so I wanted to show you this way instead. And now I'm just going to dip back in my paint, and I'm just going to create a bit of a bottom edge here, because clouds always have this, where they have a bit of a bottom edge, and I might just go through a little bit of a bottom edge here, right, that the cloud seeps into. A little bit of a darker edge maybe. A little like that. Same with this one. A little bit of a bottom edge. Now don't worry if it doesn't look perfect, because this is going to be covered up by the boats anyways. This is just more practice for you to kind of get the idea of how this could possibly work out. And then I'm just going to go back in with my tissue again. A bit of a darker. Just go back in and add some darkness to it. And then a little bit of lightness again. And I just work it back and forth like that a little bit. Every time you do it, you're adding another layer. You're adding a little bit more interest. And then finally, I'm going to add a wee bit more light white to it to really kind of give it some, go through, give it a little bit more of a look, hopefully a little bit more of a cloud formation type of look, like that. Not totally sure how this is working out, and it's always a little bit of, it's interesting. You can spend some time just fooling around with it and figuring out what works for you and what doesn't. It's the beauty of paint. If it doesn't work for you, just get rid of it, start again. And the way you get rid of it is just let it dry, or even while it's still semi-wet, and just pull over some of the other colors again. Remember that everything is always horizontal when we paint. Always, always, always. Sky and water, we're always painting in a horizontal type of direction. And it's very important to remember that, because if you paint up and down like this, it will look very awkward. So, and if you look up at the sky, go outside, check out the sky, you will see that it definitely is in a very horizontal type of direction, right? So, want to make sure that we maintain that. See where that's at. Yeah, I kind of like that. I think I might leave it like that. The other thing to note is that I also, in the meantime, did the sides. You see that? Make sure you do the top and sides. When this hangs on the wall, you will see the top and the sides, right? So you have to make sure that you actually do the top and sides in this project. Okay, so first thing I want to do is I'm going to place a piece of tape horizontally across the canvas. I'm going to make sure that it's pretty level with the bottom, so it's fairly straight, and that it is covering up the horizon, covering up the sky, so I know I'm going to get a nice clean edge. The reason for this is I want a nice clean edge to show the difference, or to show the variation between the sky and the water. And the other thing that I'm trying to achieve here is to create a bit of a different color as well. So I've made up my palette, and I'm going to choose my water more in greens. So you can see I've got a bunch of different greens here. I have the original blue, I've got a darker green, a mid green, a light green. I've got the original blue and the white here. Talking a little bit about mixing colors, something that you should know. When you add white to a color or black to a color, you gray it down, especially the black. It totally makes it gray. So when you're trying to create a different color, in this case I wanted to create more of a turquoisey for my water, I had to add a bit of yellow to my blue. When I yellow to the blue, I get this color, and this color over here is a little darker. So with the darker color, adding the yellow to the blue, this obviously has more blue in it, this has a little bit more yellow in it, this has some white in it. One of the other tips that I've used is I've used the complementary colors. This looks very greeny, and I want to make it a little bit darker. So I've used the complementary color, which is red, add a little bit of red in the green, and it deepens the green color. So that's another way that you can, rather than adding the black to darken it, I can add a touch of the red to darken it, and it maintains the same intensity of color. It doesn't start to gray it down, but it deepens it a little bit. So play around with that. Don't worry if you run out of paint. You can always arrange for more paint to be dropped off in your town or in your city. Okay, so I'm going to start here, and in this case I'm going to use a palette knife. So what I have done is I've collected a few different things to use for my palette knife. So the knife that I was using earlier in our sample board didn't have a very sharp edge. So I went out and I found a couple of different things just around the house. See what you can find. Anything with a bit of a flat edge will work. This is actually a cheese knife that I found in the drawer. If you have a putty knife, that works as well. And this one is it's just a little wooden thing, and it's meant like it's a tiny wooden spatula. So this works well too because it has a really flat edge over here. So as we get going, we'll see what works best. So the first thing I'm going to do is use my paintbrush and just put down a fairly light layer. So I'm going to grab a pretty light layer here, and I'm just going to put it down as the start of my water layer. And I'm kind of liking that. So I'm just going to do the light all the way through, or the lighter color. Don't forget about the sides and the bottom as well. Make sure your paintbrush is wet enough. Some of you are going to experience that the paint is not really moving around as well as it should. One of the ways that you can do that is you'll take your water, put your brush in your water, and then just make sure that you go across the edges here to get all the drips out. So there's no real drips left in it. A little water in it, it's moist, but there has no drips, no real water hanging around in there. Okay, now I want it to go lighter as it goes towards the horizon, right? So I'm going to deepen and darken up the bottom a little bit. I'm going to go down in here. Oh, mine's very green. I think I'm okay with that. And I'm going to deepen it up as it is in the bottom of the very bottom here. Painting. Sometimes even deepening it can be a couple of different layers, because I have the white underneath, or the lighter part underneath. There's a lot of tissue paper stuck in there, so pick that out. Come on, there we go. Have a bit of the water under, or the lighter part underneath. So it might work for me better to let this dry, and then to work it up after it's dried. So I might do that. Don't forget again your sides. Paint your sides out. In order to put the tape down, you have to have a completely dry area. I use my blow dryer, my hair blow dryer, to dry that area. So I'm going to let this dry for a few minutes, and then I'm going to come back and put some darker into the bottom. Okay, so I'm taking the tape off because it was nice and dry underneath the tape, and there was no real white edges coming up. That's the thing you want to make sure. Now I have what definitely looks like a horizon line. It goes from dark to light over here, from dark to light over there. A few things in the sky I don't love. Looking at it right now, I don't really love this. I might go back and try to fix this a little bit. It looks a bit odd that way. And the clouds are kind of cool. It's just practicing for a different technique, which is neat. I might go in later on and add a little bit more of that darker blue. I still have some on my palette. So I'll try to do that a little bit, and then we'll see where we're at. All right, so I'm using my flat brush. You can see it here, fixing up the clouds. Just going in there, did some different colors. I'm just going to go in there with white and just kind of dabbing on a little bit of some white fluffiness. Notice I'm changing my brush direction every time I do this, and I'm not doing a solid line. This is all about lights and darks again. So I'm imagining the fluffiness of the clouds coming in like this and like this. There's a little bit of fluffiness coming up like that. If you look at the real clouds, you can actually see how that works. So you want to kind of see that, create that. And for me, I don't want it to be a definite line or a darkness at all. It's just a little hint of what's happening up in the sky here. Maybe I'll add a wee bit of light down in there. And you can see I've got some different colors happening in here. Oh, see, I don't really love how this is working out because I find the lines are too visible. You could also use your round brush for this part. It might be better even. I like this brush because it gives me a little bit of sense of definition. You can see I'm kind of creating the cloud thing as I go along. I like that part of it, but I don't like the definite lines that it leaves. So I've got to work it out a bit. Anyways, I think I'm pretty happy with that as far as the clouds go. And now I'm just going to work on fixing this area up here. Okay, so I think I got rid of most of what I wanted to over here. I used my large brush again, went back in with some bright blue, which was the original sky color, and used a little bit of the sky color, went back and forth a little bit, smoothed it out, and I think I'm fairly happy with that. Again, that's one of the beautiful things about paint. You can just keep going until you're happy with it. I also love the smooth way that this has worked out for a background. Going to let this dry for a few minutes, and then we're going to start to build our tall ships. Okay, so remember, this is what we want to do, and there's a few things I want to talk about before we start. First of all, look at the difference in skies. This is a nice light, you know, kind of a nice light, almost sunny type of sky over here, and this one's much more dark and cloudy, which is totally okay. I think what I'm going to do is I want to build my boats to be quite light like this, and then they will really stand out against the dark sky. So whenever you do objects on a drawing or a canvas, you always want to do odd numbers, so 1, 3, 5, 7, 9 type of thing. So I've chosen to do 7 in this area, and I'm going to do the same on my canvas. I think 7 is a good number. And I plan this out before I start. I just don't randomly start with this. I plan it out first because there's a couple of other things to think about. Usually, first of all, you don't want anything on the horizon line. Boats are never on the horizon line. That looks awkward. Like you would almost never see the actual boat on the horizon line. You might see a tip of a boat if you're looking at like a cruise ship or something like that, but you wouldn't see it on the horizon line. So we have dropped all of our boat ends down past the horizon line. They're all dropped down into the water area, and I'm going to do the same in here. Second thing to note is the larger the boat, usually the closer it is to you. So you can see here, these larger boats, I see all of them. They are completely in the front. So this one, and this one are the largest. They're the lowest on the canvas. They may not be the tallest because these are tall ships, or tall sailboats, so some might be taller than others, but if they're the widest also. So the larger the object, the closer it is to you, mostly. And that we're going to really exaggerate that a little bit because we want to make it clear that we know what we're doing with this. So the larger boats are closer to us, and they're going to drop lower on my canvas. So when you organize your boats, do that. First do 3, say, larger boats that are a bit lower. And I did that here, 1, 2, and 3. Second thing that I want you to note is we want to bring the viewer's eye up and into the canvas. So one of the ways of doing this is rounding out this sail to go this way and this sail to go this way. We also don't want it to go completely to a peak and completely down because that sometimes does look awkward. It looks too manufactured. So I have it kind of coming to a peak, dropping down, and then dropping again. So now my viewer eye goes completely around in a really nice way. I could also have a boat coming off the side here, but chose not to do that for today. If you want to do that, you can totally do that. Okay, so I got 7 boats. You can see I started with my 3. I just drew first with a low ruler and pencil. I dried this with my blow dryer, although it was a little bit wet in here still, but that's okay. So drew the first 3 and then drew a second layer of another 4 back in here. Made my first 3 be the tallest. Yeah, so made my first 3. So this one over here is tallest, then this one, and then this one. You can see the marks are over here, that, and I think this one stops over here. I also want to be careful not to stop just touching a cloud, because that also creates negative tension. So I either need to keep it down to about this area, which I did in this boat, or go up to about this area in here if you're going past the cloud or in front of the cloud. And then the last thing to note is you want to pay attention which one is coming in front and which one's behind. Okay, so we've got that first. We've got that all layered down, so we kind of know what we're doing. But I'm going to do the bottom first, the water first, because if I think about it in layers, the sky is going to come behind everything, and then the water is still going to be behind the boats. So the boats will be the last thing that I do. So I want to create some of this water first. In this one here, they use the palette knife to do that. I also use the palette knife up there, but I wanted to spend a bit more time showing you a different way to make clouds, so I did a different thing up here. But in this one, we're also going to use the palette knife for the water, just to give you some experience with that. So that's the next thing that I'm going to do. All right, so take the palette knife. You can see I put a couple of different colors of paint. I have some of that darker paint. I'm going to start at the bottom, and I already started this, and I'm just going to scrape it along. And part of the way of scraping it is pushing it and then lifting it up and scraping it off. You can hear it. Now I'm loading up with a bit of lighter paint. Do the same thing across the top here. Being very careful not to go above the horizon line. Okay, we don't want to go above the horizon line. So be very careful about that. I'm going to dip into a bit of darker again. Put a little bit of the darker kind of mid-tone. So I almost have like a bit of a mid-tone type of palette knife scraping here. And I want to be really clear with you again that we still want to follow the same rules. So we do want some of this darker on the bottom. So I'm going to create that first. So I'm going to dip in just purely the dark, and I'm just going to, but I don't want to cover it up all completely. So I'm just going to scrape it down a little bit on the bottom like this to get a slightly darker base. And I'm actually going to dip a wee bit in black first and just pull a little bit of black. Now you got to be really careful when you do this because we don't want it to be too streaky, but I do want to put a little bit of really nice dark black in the bottom here to really show this. The more that you have your palette knife on an angle, the less scraping you're going to get. So other thing, and you can just practice with this. If you hold it down, you can just really nicely pull. See, I'm almost, and then if I pull it up, I scrape. So just practice, you'll get the hang of it when you do it. The point of it is that a couple of different things. One, it teaches you that you can use almost anything to paint with. And that's an interesting thing. And the other thing is this becomes a bit more of a layered paint. You can also do it in layers. Again, I'm pulling across in this way, but if I want to create layers like that of a little bit of different edges or a little bit of a different direction, I can go up and I can go down, whatever I like. And I could let it dry and I could do a second layer. So I could say, okay, you know what, I'm going to do all of the dark. Oh, I've got light in my brush. Or my palette knife. I'm going to do all of the dark first, and then I'm going to go let it dry, and then I'm going to go back in there and do some light. So just, you know, just have some fun with this. Fool around a little bit with this and see what you do. So I'm going to do a darker bottom. Again, still going across very horizontally. And then I'm going to create a lighter top part. But I'm going to dry it in between because I want to create some different layers with it. I also want to create a bit of texture with it. It's up to you how you do that. Okay, so I'm just going to go dry it and then I'll show you the next layer. Okay, and the goal of the water, you can see I put another layer on there. The goal of the water is to show some texture. So not everything can be even. We don't want any real sharp lines. We want it almost to be like a reflection because that's normally what water is. So it should have some dark and some light. on my palette knife, what I did at the end of it, and I'll show you what I did, is I dipped into the blue and then I tipped out the top with a little bit of white. So here's the palette knife. Where am I? Right over here. So blue with a little bit of white on the top, or sorry, the greenish blue with a bit of white on the top. Now when I go across, you'll see that I'm just getting a little bit lighter in the very top of the water. Again, as we go to the horizon line, we want things to lighten up a little bit. So I'm putting some nice light streaks, sometimes getting, you know, just paint in there all the way, white paint, and then just scraping across, always in a horizontal. Even if I go like this to get a little bit of paint off my palette knife, I'm going to spread it out in a horizontal fashion. So I'm kind of happy with that. Don't forget also, sometimes some of it's going to be covered up with the boats, right? So we don't need to be too concerned. We don't want any sharp lines. This is very much a style of expressionism. It's kind of expressing, you know, your take on it. It's not exact, it's not precise, so anything works. So this is right now the bottom of the water. I got some weird light coming in, a little bit of the sunshine coming in from outside, so you can see it's a little bit glossy in those areas there. But overall, I like the way it looks. I like the way it looks like it waves out a little bit at the very top, and I like the darkness that we see across the bottom, especially in this area over here. So I'm going to leave it and dry it. Again, that's a really important thing too, is to know when is enough. And at this point, that is enough for what I wanted to accomplish. So I'm going to dry it first, be back in a moment. All right, look at these two different examples. The example of this one, and this one here, I had a lot of fun with the bottom. You can see that I've put a lot of contrast in there, really dark areas and really light areas. Some of these dark areas are supposed to be shadows of where the boats are, so it might still go back in and do some of that. If you contrasted it to this though, this one's a little bit smoother. And then if you look at this purple one here, I have a lot of different color in this one. Do you see that? Look at, I got blues and purples and blacks and whites, and I have a lot more variety of contrast, a lot more contrast in this one as well. This one again is much smoother. So you can see what style you like and what works best for you. Okay, so I've redrawn my boats there. I always did the top lines, and that's why I did it before I did the waters, because I want to maintain the top lines so I know where things are going. So the next part, we're going to use a fairly light white paint. I'm going to keep the rest of the colors on my tray. So the rest of the colors stay on my tray, but I'm going to use this white mostly. And I'm just simply going to make sure my palette knife is fairly clean. And I'm just going to draw across. So dip it in, dip, 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 dip. Oh, sorry, probably can't see that. Dip, dip, dip. And then just draw it across the edge of the boat. So I'm going to start with one of the bigger ones because I have a lot of paint on my thing. So I'm just drawing it across like that. Trying to stay a little bit within the curve of the actual boat. So here it goes further down. I've got my line up to there, and on the bottom it's quite full. Lots of white, on the top not so much. So that's the first one. Gonna try this one as well. Cross, 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 kind of like that. Going up through the cloud here. Keep going, keep going, keep going until the very top of it, and then up in there. You can almost draw like a straight line down here if you want. That kind of shows the edge too. You see I'm trying kind of moving my palette knife back and forth, and get some paint on my palette knife, and I can use it as a bit of a straight edge here to draw it across. Okay, so that's the first two. Now I want to get some color in these guys. I'm going to use a really light blue, and I'm just going to draw on top of it some light blue. So now I'm starting to mix it up. I have chosen to keep this very fresh and very light. I want to think as well, when you do this, the way that the sun is going to be hitting these sails, you're going to have some areas that are really light and some areas that are darker. I'm going to follow the same idea as I did before, of going from light to dark, from top to bottom. I'm going to put some darker in the bottom here, and I'm getting some beautiful blue vibrant color. As I scrape across, another thing to notice, I'm starting heavy and scraping light. So starting really heavy, lots of pressure, and then letting go of the pressure. Lots of pressure and just letting it go. And if I do that, that creates a really interesting it creates a nice idea of the sail, and I'm getting some patchy looks in there. Once in a while, I'll have a really dark area where maybe I don't want a dark area. You see right in here, see how dark that is? So I might very lightly just scrape that back a bit. Just push that back. I just don't want any harsh lines except at the very side here where the sail's coming out. That's where I want the harsh lines, right? But this is the strong lines, but I don't want any real strong lines here. I want to kind of fade it out. So I might go back and forth a little bit and scrape it back and forth. And then I'm gonna have to do that as well to fill in the parts that didn't quite get paint on them on the other side of the part of the sail where you started. So you can go back and forth a little bit like that. Now just thinking, why don't I try to put a real dark edge in the very bottom. So I'm using the sky colors here that I originally had for the sky. I'm just gonna create, or just maybe even at the edge of the sail here, just a little bit of a dark idea. When you do this palette type, knife type painting, the other thing to remember is that you want a lot of texture, you want a lot of color. So that's what we're doing in here. I'm just going to ease off from the top here just a little bit, maybe just even, you know, a slight idea of it up here. Yeah, slight idea of it up there. These palette knives are really, or whatever you're using for your palette knives, really very versatile. Kind of like the way that's going out. I like the way that's going. So I'm going to let that dry, and I'm going to continue to do that for all 7 sails. All right, so I've done a little bit more work, as you can see. I really want to make sure I define the sails as they go up. So I've got a mix of pretty light paint here, and I'm just going to go back on the side here and just scrape it through, and just going to create a bit of a background before I start to really define and add more color, to make sure I can see where the edge of the sail in this one here is meeting the sky. So I want to make that really clear. So I'm going to do the same with this one. Just kind of blend it through, getting a little bit more color onto my palette knife here. This one as well, where is the edge meeting? So on the other side, and I don't really want super harsh lines, but I just do want to define it as far as taking it away from the sky and the cloud, making it a very definite color here to say this is boat and this is sky. Don't like it when it doesn't have a tip on it, so I'm just going to go through and just give that a bit of a tip right there on the very top. Same with this one. You've got to be a little bit careful you don't get too high here. So you want your tip to be very defined like that, and just maybe something like this. Okay, so I've got them basically defined now, but I do want to create some more color in them. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to create a bit of dark, and I'm going to now work from dark to light. So I'm going to grab some dark onto my palette knife, and I'm just going to start, and don't forget that as things are closer to you, they're going to be darker, right? So these ones that are closer to me are going to be darker, more detail. So I'm going through and I'm adding some nice baseline dark over here. Doing the same, you'll see this one even more because it has a very soft color right now. Baseline at the bottom, I want it to be even more dark, and at the top I want it to lighten out. So, and I also want to be conscious of those harsh sides here. I don't really want a whole lot that's showing a very harsh edge here. What I mean with a harsh edge is one that you can actually see the outline. I want it to kind of fade out. So here, I have a little bit less paint now on my palette knife, which is good. I'm going to go back and add a bit more, and then do the front ones first, and then work into the back ones. So here's another front one. This one's more at the front. Cross, add some nice dark shades to it, and then a little bit, just a tiny bit in the back of this one, because this one's further away. This one will just have a wee little bit to add some variety to it. This one over here, oops, I went a bit too far. So if that happens, you can just say I went a little bit too far from what I had before. That's okay. You can just fix it. As long as you try to keep a straight up and down sail, it's not a big deal to do that. One of the ways to do that, by the way, is just start at the top and just draw a line with your palette knife. If you have lots of paint loaded on there, you can just draw a line straight down and then pull out from that line. I have to go a bit further because I want to get rid of that white that's on the edge there. There we go. Come all the way down to that. And again, this one here is going to be behind that one. So when I go into my lighter color, I'm going to create a really a bit of a going in behind, but in the meantime, I want to make sure that this has a nice sharp line as well. So I'm just going to move up. Okay, put a bit more paint on my palette knife here. And I'm just going to move this one over here to have a nice sharp line as well. There we go. And then this one over here starts about here. This is a bit of a more difficult one because it's so much in behind. So I'll probably take a paintbrush later and define that a little bit better. But it's just going to kind of come and have a little bit of dark right in there. That's okay. And then, so I'm going to step back and take another look and see where else I want to create some more darker areas. Don't forget, I'm going to go over it with white. So if it looks a little bit dark right now, that's okay. This is my darkest color. Make sure that I've got a bit of a line in all these, and I'm going to do that later with a paintbrush as well, create more of a line. Okay, so if I step back and look at that, I'm pretty happy with it. This one ends right on the horizon line. I'm going to put a little bit of dark underneath there because I don't want it to end right on the horizon line. Just add a little bit of darkness to that, make it clear that it's ending right about there. Now I'm going to go back in with a medium color. And I'm going to scrape through. I want some of the dark to come through, so I'm going to be careful how much I put on there. Not too much, just a little bit, maybe I'm starting a little bit more at the top, just because I want it to be a little bit lighter at the top. So it's got to cut through a little bit more here. This one actually goes in behind, so we want to make sure that we're creating this look that it actually is going in behind. More up in there, a little bit more in here, there we go, and over here, and then finally this side, because the sail goes in this way, so start at the other side and go like that. Okay, next is adding the white. Look, I put some pure white. I still have the leftovers from the other colors, but I put some pure white on this, and now I'm going to go across and I'm just going to add some white to it. So I want to be very deliberate here as well. Want it to look patchy, but want to make sure that the white is also coming through to provide some contrast. Stay there. Okay, so there I've covered with white most of it, or what I like. A couple of things that I'm still going to work on. I just want to show you. See how it's got a bit of a ragged edge over here. Just going to lightly go back from the other side and just create that this is my solid edge for my solid edge for the other side of the sail. Right, so I'm just going to go back a little bit and do a little bit more of that. Here I have that problem as well. Define it and say this is the solid edge of the sail. Here we have that as well. So we're going to go back into this way and then like this, just to create a little bit of a nice edge. It makes it a little crisper and cleaner if you do that. It's not terrible to put a little bit more back, a little bit more of those of the color back in. Yeah, you don't want to mix it too much because that gets, I mean, when you mix the paint, then you totally lose what the whole idea behind this paint type of painting is, and that's to have a lot of contrast. So I think that I'm fairly happy with the way that looks right now. Okay, and the next step is to put a bit of a defining line. So there's a couple of different ways that you can do that. Look at how light this one is, by the way, in comparison with mine. My sails are really, really dark. So if you'd like them to be a bit lighter, you can. I kind of like it. I have a very dark sky here, and I feel like that echoes in the painting a little bit. So I think that that's okay for me. But in this one, it was very light, and you can do that as well. Create some real contrast in the light there. So look at this one here, and do you see how I've used a very fine brush and just went through with a fine brush very carefully and put some line, put some shadow line on the outside of the sail. You can do that with two different ways. So with a fine brush, that works. The other way you can do it is just with your actual palette knife, because it will help you get a really straight line. So I'm going to dip in some dark, and I should maybe wash my palette knife before I do this, but anyways, we'll just try and see how it works out. And I'm going to start at the top here, and I'm just going to pull it down. You see, and if I pull it almost like a paintbrush down, it's a little bit easier than a paintbrush in one way, because I don't have to worry about keeping my hand steady. So pull it all the way down. And you can do that. The other idea is you don't want a solid line. So I don't want a big solid line. I kind of want a bit of a broken line. So you can see I'm getting that here. A solid line does not work well because we don't want to define the sail that way. The entire thing's a little bit misty, a little bit in the distance. So here we have a bit of a broken line. I kind of like that idea. Yeah, so that's kind of how it works. On this one as well, you can see there's a bit of a solid line. And what it does is just adds a bit of definition to your actual sail. So that will be your next step. Add some line to the outside edge. Not a solid line, a very broken line. Okay, so there I've used actually a paintbrush and I've just gone through and defined the outer edges. Two things to note. I put a little bit of a shadow underneath each sail. Sometimes I even have the, looks like the sail comes underneath the line. That's totally okay because the darker line, it will stand out more. Especially when you have one sail overlapping the other, it's important to define that line and to stop it where the other sail goes over top. And then finally make your lines go a little bit higher than what happened as far as this edge. This is hard. This edge here, this corner here is very difficult to get with a palette knife. So if you make your line go up a little bit higher, it gives the sails just that little bit of height. It looks like they're actually a bit of a triangle. And the next thing is I want to create a bit of a craft underneath the sail. So I already did a couple of them. I'm just doing this pretty straight up with white, small brush like this. Just going to go through and say, okay, that's going to be the top, that's going to be the bottom, and then I'm just going to draw it down like that. If I use a flat brush like this, it creates a pretty square base, which is what I'm looking for. So a fairly square base here. Sometimes I put a bit of a line underneath, saying that's where it's going to line out in the bottom. Again, this is almost like an impressionism thing. It's just showing the impression here. It doesn't need to be full out exactly, I feel like I'm turning this, exactly a rectangle or anything like that. It's just basically an impression. So, and I like that in this painting because I think everybody can be successful. We're not painting realistically. We're just giving more of an impression. We're using lots of different methods, and that's why this tutorial is so great. As a teaching tool, at least. Okay, so that's where I'm at for that. Now I look at it, I kind of like what I've got there. I want to add maybe a little bit more into some of the sails, and I'm just going to use a fairly dry brush again. I think I'm just going to add a little straight up white to get a bit more contrast in here. So you can go back and forth and decide, you know, what you like to do, how you want to do it. Not really loving how little white there is over there. And this is where you can use, again, this is where you get to use now your paintbrush to add a little bit to it, create some more variety, see what you like and what you don't like. Be careful if things are not dry. You notice I just picked up a bit of the gray there because the black was not completely dry. Not really loving that, but that's okay. And then I think I might go back with some bright blue. Mine's looking a little bit dull. My entire painting's looking a little bit dull. So I'm going back with the real blue color. And I'm going to bring it all the way across here. And I think I'm just going to spend a bit of time fixing or creating some more contrast in my painting. Okay, so I went back and forth with it a little bit. And you can see I've added some more color to it. I've got well-defined sails here with lots of color. It really doesn't look as nice on the screen as it does in real life, so I apologize about that. This paint dries a little bit glossy, and so you're constantly getting the gloss off of it. In real life, it's a little bit more matte, which is nicer. One thing left to do, we just want to define the bottom of the boat with our black line as well. The bottom of where the sail, the actual hull of the boat might go. Again, no solid lines, we just want some little broken lines. We just create almost a little edge there. Bring it across like that. It doesn't have to be the same in every one. This one can go a bit further out. Maybe that one can edge out on that side a little bit. And it's just to create a bit of a line, a bit of a shadow, a bit of a area that our eye can focus to. If it goes down too far like that, that's okay too. Just a touch of this idea that that we've got something happening as far as a base here for the sails. All right, so that's it. Send me your finished one, picture of your finished one, so I can kind of see what it looks like. I mean, you could spend forever going back and forth here and deciding, you know, I want to add a little more there. And at a certain point, you can say that's enough and you can stop. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Have a great day.